I never thought silence could sound this loud. The rain outside was tapping gently against the church roof, but to me, it felt like thunder. I stood there beside her coffin, surrounded by empty chairs. Each seat carried a memory, a voice that should have been here, my son's laugh, my daughter's whisper, the sound of footsteps that never came. They were all missing. And the emptiness screamed louder than any cry could. The priest's words faded into the background. Something about peace, about eternal rest. But my heart refused to listen. I couldn't stop staring at her picture, that small frame placed near the coffin. She was smiling in it. The same soft smile she had on the day we got married. It almost felt cruel that she looked that peaceful now, after all the waiting, all the longing, all the years she spent hoping her children would remember she existed. I didn't cry right away. You'd think tears come naturally in moments like this. But mine didn't. My eyes had run dry long before this day, somewhere between all those lonely dinners and all the phone calls that never came. I had learned to live with absence long before death ever arrived. Her coffin was white, simple, the kind she would have liked. She never cared for luxury. She cared for meaning. I placed a single rose on top of it, not because it was beautiful, but because it was hers. She grew those roses herself, watered them every morning, talked to them like they could listen. They were the only living things that stayed faithful to her until the end. I could hear the echo of rain through the windows. Drops sliding down the glass, slow, steady, rhythmic, almost like a heartbeat. And maybe that's why it hurt so much. Because in that sound, I kept hearing her. The way she used to hum when it rained. The way she'd say, "It's God's way of reminding us to slow down." And now, God had slowed her down forever. I looked at the doors one last time, hoping, foolishly, that someone might walk through. That maybe my son would arrive late, breathless, holding flowers. That maybe my daughter would come running in, tears in her eyes, saying she got stuck in traffic. But no. The doors stayed closed. The rain got heavier. And all I could hear was the sound of my own breathing in a room too big for one man's grief. The priest nodded toward me, as if asking if I'd like to say something. My throat felt tight, but I managed to whisper, "She waited." That's all I could say. Because that was her whole life, waiting. For birthdays, for phone calls, for visits that never happened. She waited right till the end. I think the cruelest thing about loss isn't the moment someone leaves. It's realizing how many chances you had to make them stay, and how you wasted every single one of them thinking there'd be more time. When they lowered her coffin into the ground, I whispered her favorite words, the one she used to say whenever life got hard: "Tomorrow will be better." I wanted to believe that. I wanted to believe that maybe, wherever she was, it was better. That she finally felt seen, finally felt loved. But tomorrow came, and the world didn't change. The house was still empty. The phone still silent. The children still gone. And I realized sometimes tomorrow doesn't get better. It just gets quieter. I stood under the church doorway for a long time, watching the rain fall harder. My reflection in the puddle below looked older, smaller, lonelier. I could almost hear her voice beside me, gentle as ever, saying, "Go home, you'll catch a cold." But home didn't exist anymore. Not without her. People think the story starts at the funeral, that it begins when the coffin closes, when the tears fall, when the goodbye is spoken. But that's not true. The story begins long before, in the tiny moments where love starts fading, where words go unsaid, where family becomes just a habit. And that's the part that hurts the most. Because you never see it happening. You just wake up one day, and the house is too quiet, and you realize somewhere along the way, love left, and you didn't even notice. The piano softens, almost like a breath being held. The rain slows, faint thunder hums in the distance. I walked out of that church, into the cold rain, with her rose still pressed between my fingers. And for the first time in my life, I understood what real silence feels like, the kind that doesn't come from peace, but from everything you've lost trying to hold on to it. The real story didn't begin that day. It began long before, when love started fading from our home. Before the silence, there was laughter. Before the empty house and the unanswered calls, there was warmth, a kind of love that made even the smallest things feel like miracles. We didn't have much, but somehow, it was enough. Our home was tiny, 2 rooms, peeling paint, leaky roof. But when she was there, it felt like a palace. She filled every corner with something I can't describe, a kind of light that didn't come from lamps. It came from her smile. She used to wake up early, just before sunrise. I'd hear her in the kitchen, humming softly as she boiled water for tea. The smell of cardamom would fill the air, and I'd pretend to still be asleep, just to listen to her hum that same old tune she loved. Sometimes she'd stop and whisper a prayer, her voice barely audible. She always prayed for the same thing: keep my family close, and my husband safe. She didn't ask for riches. She asked for togetherness. And back then, we had that. We were young, foolish, full of dreams we couldn't afford, but somehow, we made them work. There were nights when we had only rice and salt, but she would still make it taste like a feast. I remember once, the electricity went out during dinner. I was frustrated, angry at the world. But she just lit a candle, smiled, and said, "See? Now dinner looks romantic." She had this way of making pain look poetic, like even hardship was something to be grateful for. When our first child was born, I cried like a child myself. I remember her lying in that hospital bed, exhausted but glowing. She held that tiny baby against her chest and whispered, "You're my little miracle." I stood there, frozen, realizing that she had just given me everything I'd ever need. She didn't care about her pain, her body, her sleep. From that day, her world revolved around that child. And then, when our second came along, she somehow found even more love to give. She never ran out. Our home was chaos, the good kind. Toys scattered everywhere, the smell of baby powder, her laughter mixing with the sound of tiny footsteps. I'd come home tired from work, my shirt covered in dust, my head full of numbers and noise. But the moment I stepped through that door and saw her holding our children, everything else vanished. She'd say, "They waited for you to eat." I'd pretend to scold her for spoiling them, but deep down, I was grateful. Those little rituals were the threads that stitched our lives together. We didn't have smartphones or screens back then, just stories. She'd tell them bedtime tales about the stars and how every star represented someone who once loved deeply. Our children believed her. I think I did too. We'd all fall asleep together, the 4 of us, in one bed that was far too small but somehow always big enough for love. As the years went on, life changed. The children grew taller, louder, then quieter. Their laughter turned into busyness, school, friends, dreams that stretched far beyond our walls. She was so proud. Every time they achieved something, she'd tell the neighbors like it was the biggest news in the world. "My son got a promotion," she'd say, or "my daughter's moving to a big city." She smiled every time she said it, but I could see the flicker in her eyes, that fear every mother carries, the one that whispers, "When they fly, will they ever come back?" At first, they did. Every holiday, every festival, our home would come alive again. The air would smell of spices and laughter. She'd stay up all night cooking their favorite dishes, even when her back ached. I used to tell her, "You don't have to do all this. They're grown now." She'd laugh softly and say, "A mother never stops preparing for her children's return. It's how she keeps hope alive." Then the visits grew fewer. The phone calls shorter. "I'll come next month," they'd say. "Work's been crazy." She'd smile and nod, pretending not to notice that next month never came. But I noticed. I saw her checking her phone every evening, wiping the screen clean like it might ring if she waited long enough. Sometimes she'd set the table for 4, out of habit. And when they didn't come, she'd quietly put the extra plates away. "They'll come next time," she'd whisper. "I know they will." I remember one afternoon, she was in the kitchen, making mango pickle the way our son loved. The smell filled the whole house. I walked in and said, "You know he's not coming this week." She looked up, smiled, and said, "Still, he'll taste it one day." That's the thing about mothers, they keep believing in moments that will never happen, and somehow, that belief becomes their survival. There were evenings we'd sit together, just the 2 of us, watching old photo albums. Our children, tiny and smiling, smeared with cake or mud, their eyes full of mischief. She'd laugh at every page. But then, at the last one, she'd go quiet. She'd touch the photo gently and whisper, "They grew up so fast, didn't they?" I'd nod, unable to say what we were both thinking, that they had grown up and grown away. One night, she said something I never forgot. We were sitting on the porch, the house quiet, the world still. She looked at me and said, "We thought we were building a family. We didn't know we were building strangers." I didn't reply. I just reached over, held her hand, and felt how cold it had become. That's when I realized love doesn't disappear all at once. It fades quietly, like the last note of a song you didn't realize had ended. They say time changes everything, but I don't think that's true. Time doesn't change you, it just shows you what's already breaking. That's how it was with us. The cracks didn't appear suddenly. They came quietly, like shadows at dusk. Small moments that didn't hurt at first, but over time, they grew deep enough to drown love itself. It started with missed calls. One day turned into a week. A week into a month. They always had reasons. Meetings, flights, deadlines. I used to get angry, but she would stop me. "They're busy," she'd say, with that same tired smile. "They'll come when they can." But they never did. Our son was the first to leave. He had big dreams, said he needed to move to a new city for work. I remember the morning he packed his bags. She folded each of his shirts as if folding away a piece of her heart. She slipped a note into his pocket. When I asked what it said, she smiled and said, "Just a reminder to call his mother once in a while." He promised he would. And for a while, he did. But his calls got shorter. His voice grew distant, distracted. There was always laughter in the background, parties, friends, a life too full for us. "I'll visit soon, Ma," he said once, over the sound of music. Soon became the word we learned to hate. Then our daughter left. University first, then work, then another city. She sent us pictures of her new office, her friends, her birthdays. She looked happy. And we were happy for her, or at least, we pretended to be. Every time we saw her smiling in those photos, we told ourselves we had done something right. But every night, when the phone didn't ring, we wondered what we did wrong. At first, we tried to fill the silence. I'd talk about work, she'd talk about the neighbors, about the plants, about anything. But conversations grew shorter, meals quieter. Even the sound of spoons against plates felt louder. One evening, she served dinner for 4 out of habit. She stood there, staring at the extra plates, and then slowly took 2 of them back. "Old habits die hard," she said. I wanted to tell her that old hearts die harder, but I couldn't. Birthdays were the hardest. She'd stay up the night before, cooking their favorite dishes, wrapping small gifts they never came to receive. The next day, she'd smile, say maybe next year, and pack everything away in the cupboard. I once found her in the kitchen, holding her phone to her ear long after the call had ended. She said she liked the sound of the dial tone. It made her feel less alone. One night, I woke up to find her sitting in the living room, the light from the TV flickering across her face. She was watching old home videos, our children's first steps, their first birthdays, their laughter echoing from the past. I stood at the doorway and listened. She was smiling, but her eyes were wet. "Look how small they were," she whispered. "Look how happy." Then her voice cracked as she said, "I wonder when they stopped needing us." I didn't have an answer. Because deep down, I wondered the same. Maybe it wasn't one big moment that made them drift away. Maybe it was 1,000 small ones. A message we forgot to send, a hug we didn't hold long enough, a distance we didn't notice growing until it became impossible to cross. The house began to feel like a museum of our past. Their rooms stayed the same posters, the same toys, untouched. She cleaned them every week, dusted the shelves, opened the windows to let sunlight in. "So it doesn't smell empty," she said. I think she did it for herself, a way to pretend they'd be back any day. Sometimes she'd walk into their rooms and just sit there. I'd find her tracing her fingers over the photos on the wall, whispering their names. She'd laugh softly, remembering some small mischief or story, and then she'd fall quiet again. I wanted to tell her to stop torturing herself, but I couldn't. Because I was doing the same thing in my own way, waiting for footsteps, for voices, for signs of life that never came. We started talking less about them. Not because we forgot, but because every mention hurt too much. Instead, we spoke about the weather, the price of groceries, the neighbor's new car, meaningless words to fill the emptiness between us. Once, I caught her writing something in her diary. When I asked what it was, she said, "Just thoughts." Later, I found the page. It said, "When your children stop calling, your heart doesn't stop loving. It just learns to wait in silence." That line stayed with me. Because that's what she became, silence wrapped in love. Every day, a little quieter, a little smaller, fading slowly but refusing to disappear completely. The garden outside began to die too. The flowers she once cared for stopped blooming. She said it was because of the weather, but I think it was because even the flowers could feel her sadness. I tried to fix it, to bring color back into her days, but how do you fix something that's not broken, just missing? She still defended them. Even when I got angry, even when I said things I didn't mean. "They'll come," she'd whisper, her voice breaking. "They just need time." But I think, deep down, she knew. We both did. Time doesn't bring people back. It just makes you forget how their voice sounded when they said "I love you." One by one, they stopped calling. And one day, they stopped caring. It began with a cough. Just a small one, nothing serious. At least that's what she told me. "It's just the weather," she said, smiling through it like she always did. But I could see the tiredness behind her eyes. The kind of tired that doesn't go away with sleep. The kind that seeps into the bones. She'd brush it off, say she was fine, then lean on the kitchen counter when she thought I wasn't looking. At first, it was just coughing and fatigue. Then it became dizziness, pain, short breaths. I remember the first time I saw her clutch her chest. It was morning, she was pouring tea, humming softly, and suddenly she froze. The cup slipped from her hand and shattered on the floor. I rushed to her, my heart pounding, and she just whispered, "It's nothing. Don't make a fuss." But there was fear in her eyes, and it scared me more than anything else ever had. We went to the doctor that evening. She wore her favorite shawl, the one our daughter gave her on her birthday years ago. The waiting room smelled of disinfectant and worry. She kept glancing at the door every few minutes, as if she was expecting someone. I knew who she was hoping one of our children would show up. They didn't. It was just us, sitting in that cold room, surrounded by strangers. The doctor's words were calm, careful, the kind that hurt because they were gentle. "Her heart is weak," he said. "She needs rest, care, and she shouldn't be left alone." I nodded, but I didn't really hear him. All I could think about was how small she looked in that chair, her hands folded neatly on her lap, her smile still there, that same brave, stupidly selfless smile she always wore when she didn't want me to worry. At night, I started waking up every few hours just to check if she was breathing. Sometimes I'd find her sitting by the window, staring out into the dark, whispering something. I'd ask, "What are you doing?" and she'd say, "Talking to the moon." Maybe they're looking at it too. I never had the heart to tell her that they probably weren't. The medicine bottles started lining the table. I'd arrange them by time: morning, afternoon, night. She'd laugh at me and say, "You'd make a good nurse." But I wasn't a nurse. I was a man watching the only person he ever loved fade away, slowly, quietly, like the end of a candle. She still tried to live like nothing had changed. She'd hum while folding laundry, water the plants even when her hands trembled. One day, she nearly fell while carrying clothes to the balcony. I caught her just in time. She laughed it off, said, "You still have good reflexes." But I saw it then, the fear she was hiding behind her jokes. She was afraid of leaving me alone. I started sleeping less. The night stretched endlessly, the silence pressing down on my chest. I'd hear her breathing slow down sometimes, so faint that I'd move closer just to be sure she was still there. Once, she woke up and saw me sitting by her side. She smiled and said, "You look worse than me." I wanted to laugh, but my throat hurt too much to make a sound. She began asking about the children more often. Her voice softer each time. "Did they call today?" she'd ask. "Did they send a message?" Sometimes I'd say, "Maybe tomorrow," and she'd smile, satisfied, like that answer was enough to keep her alive for one more day. I didn't have the courage to tell her the truth, that there were no calls, no messages, no visits. Only silence. There were days she'd hold the phone in her hand and stare at it for minutes. Once, she asked me, "Do you think they even know I'm sick?" I didn't answer. I just took the phone from her and said, "You need rest." Because the truth would have broken her faster than the illness ever could. Her body grew weaker, but her faith stayed the same. She prayed every night, her voice trembling but steady. She never asked for healing, only for her family. "Keep them safe," she'd whisper. "And keep him strong." I'd sit there beside her, listening, pretending to be brave while my heart screamed inside me. One night, she couldn't sleep. She asked me to help her sit up, so she could see the garden through the window. The roses she'd planted were starting to die. Their petals were brown, falling one by one in the rain. She looked at them and said, "They're just tired. Like me." Then she smiled. "They'll bloom again when it's time." I wanted to tell her that nothing blooms the same once it's gone, but I stayed quiet. I didn't want her last moments to be filled with my despair. That same night, she turned to me and said, "What did they say when you told them I wasn't well?" My mouth went dry. I could feel my pulse in my throat. I looked at her, those kind eyes searching my face for hope, and I couldn't give her any. How could I tell her that the people she'd given her life to couldn't even give her a moment? So I lied. I said, "They're praying for you." She nodded slowly, as if she already knew the truth but chose to believe the lie instead. She reached for my hand and said, "That's enough. As long as they remember me, I'll be fine." I wanted to speak, to tell her how much she meant to me, how I wasn't ready to lose her, but the words wouldn't come. My voice stayed trapped in my chest, like grief already knew what was coming next. She fell asleep after that, her hand still in mine. I sat there watching her breathe, afraid that if I looked away, she'd stop. The candle beside the bed flickered, the flame bending and swaying with the air. For a moment, it almost looked like it bowed, like even light was saying goodbye. When she asked me what her children said, I couldn't tell her the truth. The house had grown quiet, that kind of quiet that doesn't feel peaceful, just heavy. Every sound seemed louder, the ticking of the clock, the faint rustle of the curtains, the whisper of her shallow breathing. She had stopped moving much by then. Most days she just lay there, eyes half open, a soft smile that tried to comfort me when it should have been the other way around. That evening, I remember sitting by her side, reading from an old book she loved, stories we used to laugh at years ago. But this time, my voice shook. I didn't read for her to listen, I read so I wouldn't have to face the silence. The candle on the table flickered weakly, its flame bending with every breath she took. I looked at her and realized how thin she had become, her skin almost translucent against the light. She turned her head slightly toward me. Her voice was barely more than a breath. "Do you think," she said, "they'll come if I ask?" For a moment I couldn't speak. I knew what she meant, but I wanted to pretend I didn't. "Who?" I asked softly, though my heart already knew. She smiled faintly, her lips trembling. "The children," she whispered. "If I ask them to come, they will, won't they?" I forced a smile. "Of course," I said. "They'll come. They just need some time." I wanted to believe it myself. But she saw through me, she always did. Her hand reached for mine, her fingers cold but still gentle. "I just want to see them once more," she said. "Just once more, and then I'll be fine." That night, after she fell asleep, I tried calling them both. First our son. The phone rang, and then went to voicemail. I left a message, told him it was serious, told him to come. Then I called our daughter. She didn't answer either. I tried again. Still nothing. I sat there in the dark, holding the phone to my chest, listening to the silence on the other end, and I realized how long it had been since I'd heard their voices. Hours passed. The rain started outside, slow, steady, like the sky was echoing her heartbeat. She stirred and asked me, "Did they reply?" I lied. I said, "They're trying to get flights. They'll be here soon." She smiled, her eyes lighting up for the first time in weeks. "Maybe tomorrow," she whispered. "They'll come tomorrow." I nodded, but something inside me cracked. Because I knew tomorrow might not come for her. That night, I stayed awake beside her bed. I held her hand while she slept. Her fingers twitched sometimes, as if she was reaching out for something in her dreams. At one point, she whispered their names, soft, barely audible. She said them like a prayer. I looked up at the ceiling and wondered if prayers that soft ever reach heaven. Around midnight, the power went out. The house fell into darkness, except for the small candle still burning on the table. Its light wavered across her face, painting her in gold and shadow. She looked peaceful, almost angelic, and that frightened me. Because peace like that never stays. She woke again, coughing, her voice weak. "Promise me," she said, "if they don't come tonight, you won't be angry with them." I looked at her, tears blurring everything, and I asked, "Why not?" She smiled faintly. "Because they're just lost. Lost people forget how to love for a while. But one day, they remember." I didn't answer. I couldn't. My throat burned from the weight of all the words I wanted to say. I wanted to tell her that she had loved enough for all of us. That she had given everything, even to people who stopped giving back. I wanted to tell her I didn't know how to exist in a world she wasn't in. But instead, I said the only thing that didn't sound like goodbye. "Rest now," I whispered. "When you wake, they'll be here." She smiled. Her eyes fluttered closed. Her breathing slowed, softer and softer, like a lullaby fading away. I sat there, still holding her hand, watching the rise and fall of her chest, counting each breath as if my life depended on it. The candle beside us flickered once, then again. For a moment, the flame dimmed so low I thought it would die. Then it steadied just enough to glow one last time across her face. She looked like she was dreaming. Maybe she was. Maybe she was seeing them the way she wanted to, laughing, running toward her, calling her name. I heard her whisper their names in her sleep, one after the other. So softly, it almost sounded like the wind was saying them for her. Then the room went still. The candle gave one final shiver and went out. The rain outside didn't stop. It just kept falling, patient, endless, unbothered by the world it was washing away. That night, I heard her whisper their names in her sleep. The next morning, she was gone. The sky cried before I could. The rain fell from morning till night, as if the heavens themselves couldn't bear to watch. The day of her funeral didn't feel real. It felt like walking through someone else's dream, slow, muffled, distant. I remember standing by the window that morning, watching the hearse pull up. For a long time, I couldn't move. I just kept thinking, she can't be inside that box, not her. When I finally walked into the church, the world felt too quiet. The candles flickered weakly, their flames bending in the draft. Rows of chairs stood empty, every single one a reminder of the people who weren't there. I had put out word, called, messaged, begged, but no one came. Not family. Not friends. Not even our children. The priest greeted me with a nod. His voice was gentle, but it barely reached me. Everything sounded far away. I could only hear the rain tapping against the stained glass windows, soft and rhythmic, like a slow heartbeat echoing in an empty chest. I walked up to her coffin. It was white, simple, the kind she would have liked. She always hated extravagance. Said beauty belonged in effort, not money. I placed a rose on top, one from the garden she loved. The last rose she ever grew. I remember her saying once, "Flowers don't need much to bloom. Just attention." She gave everything attention except herself. I stood there, staring down at her face. They had dressed her in her favorite cream shawl. Her lips were pale, her hands folded gently over her chest. She looked peaceful. Too peaceful. I should have felt comfort in that, but I didn't. Because peace without presence feels like cruelty. The priest began the prayers. His words blurred into the rain. I didn't listen. My eyes stayed on her, my thoughts chasing all the things I never said. I should have told her more often how brave she was, how her love had built me, how her laughter made our broken house feel alive. But people always think there will be another day. Another chance. Another tomorrow. When the priest finished, he asked me softly, "Would you like to say something?" I nodded, but my voice refused to come. For a long moment, I just stood there, frozen. Then, somehow, the words slipped out, small, almost a whisper. She waited, I said. All her life, she waited. The priest bowed his head, but he didn't speak. There was nothing left to say. When they began lowering her coffin, I thought I'd fall with it. I gripped the edge of the pew, trying to steady myself. Every thud of earth against the wood sounded like thunder in my chest. I whispered her favorite words, the same one she used to tell me whenever life got too heavy. Tomorrow will be better. But the words felt hollow now. Tomorrow had no meaning without her. When the others left, I stayed. The church emptied, the candles burned low, the rain slowed to a drizzle. I sat there in the front pew, staring at the place where her coffin had been. The silence pressed down on me, thick and merciless. The priest came back once more, gently placing a hand on my shoulder. You should go home, he said. God gives peace to those who love deeply. I wanted to believe him. But peace wasn't what I wanted. I wanted her voice, her scolding, her laughter, her quiet hum when she cooked. Peace was for people who stop missing. I never would. When I finally stepped outside, the world was gray. The street was empty, puddles forming along the sidewalk. The air smelled of wet earth, the same smell that used to fill our garden when she watered her flowers. I walked slowly, not caring that my clothes were soaked. The rain didn't bother me anymore. It felt like a punishment I deserved, to be drenched in the same tears I couldn't shed. When I reached home, the door creaked the same way it always did. The scent hit me instantly, her perfume, faint but still there. I stood in the hallway, dripping rain onto the floor, staring at her slippers neatly placed by the bed. Everything was just as she left it, the folded blanket, the half-finished knitting, her glasses resting on the table. It felt like she was still here, just in another room. I sat on her side of the bed and waited, as if she'd walk in any second and tell me to change my wet clothes. I whispered into the silence, they didn't come. My voice cracked halfway. I swallowed hard and tried again, softer this time. But I did. The night dragged on. I didn't sleep. I watched the window, the same one she used to stare through every evening. The rain continued outside, not loud, just patient. The world looked washed clean, but I didn't. Inside me, everything still felt covered in dust. I realized something that night. You don't really lose someone all at once. You lose them slowly, in pieces. You lose the sound of their laugh first. Then the way they said your name. Then the warmth of their hand, the scent of their hair, the small habits you thought you'd always remember. Until one day, what's left is just silence. Grief doesn't shout. It whispers. It waits. It sits quietly beside you until it becomes a part of who you are. That night, as I looked around the empty room, I understood what she used to mean when she said, home isn't a place, it's a person. And when that person is gone, home becomes just walls and furniture and memories that echo louder than any sound. Grief can break you, it almost broke me. But sometimes, when everything is stripped away, you see what truly mattered. Love. Not the words, not the grand moments, just the simple act of being there. I wasn't there enough. And neither were they. The piano swells gently. Rain continues softly in the background. The man's voice lowers to a whisper. But grief can either break you, or make you see what truly matters. After the funeral, the house became quieter than it had ever been. But this quiet was different. It wasn't the silence of waiting anymore, it was the silence of understanding. Days blurred into each other. I would wake up, make tea for one, and sit in her chair by the window. The garden outside had started to bloom again, and I couldn't decide if that made me angry or grateful. Life was moving forward, even when I didn't want it to. People came, neighbors, relatives, voices I hadn't heard in years. They brought food, kind words, promises to visit more often. But as soon as they left, the silence came back. They didn't understand. How could they? You can't understand losing someone who was part of your breathing unless it happens to you. One evening, while cleaning her side of the dresser, I found something tucked inside her drawer. A small notebook, wrapped carefully in a handkerchief. Her handwriting filled every page, small, delicate letters. At first, I thought it was a diary. But as I read, I realized they were letters. Letters she had written to our children but never sent. I sat down and began reading them one by one. Each letter was filled with love, apologies, and memories. She wrote about the meals she cooked for them, about how proud she was of their success, about how she missed them every day but never wanted to burden them with her loneliness. One line stopped me cold: "If you're reading this someday, know that your mother never blamed you. I just wish you'd called more." I don't remember when I started crying, but I couldn't stop. It felt like her voice was right beside me, soft and forgiving, even after everything. That was the kind of love she had, the kind that didn't demand, didn't punish, just stayed, quietly, even when ignored. That night, I couldn't sleep. Her words played over and over in my head. I sat at the table where we used to eat dinner together and stared at the empty chair across from me. For the first time in weeks, I didn't feel crushed by grief. I felt something else, a purpose. She had spent her whole life waiting for them. And even in death, she was still waiting, in her letters, in her words, in her hope that they might finally hear her. I couldn't let that hope die with her. So, I began to write. Not as a father, not as a husband, but as a man who had witnessed love in its purest, most painful form. I wrote to them, our son and daughter. I told them everything. How their mother waited by the window every evening, how she kept their rooms spotless, how her last words were about them, not herself. I didn't use anger. I used truth. Because sometimes, truth is the only voice that can cut through years of distance. I spent hours at that table, my hands shaking with every word. When I was done, I sealed each envelope and wrote just one sentence on the back: "She forgave you. I hope one day you forgive yourselves." The next morning, I walked to the post office. The man behind the counter asked if I wanted to add a return address. I shook my head. These letters weren't meant to come back. They were meant to find their way into hearts that had forgotten how to feel. When I mailed them, I felt lighter, not healed, not happy, just free. For the first time since she left, the air didn't feel suffocating. It felt still, calm, like the world had finally exhaled. That night, I sat by her chair again. The candle burned beside me, steady and soft. I spoke into the air, as if she was still there. "They'll know now," I whispered. "They'll know who you really were." And I could almost hear her voice in the quiet, not words, just warmth. Days turned into weeks. The garden grew greener. I started watering her plants again, trimming the dead branches. It felt like I was keeping a promise. One afternoon, while I was out there, I heard a knock at the door. When I opened it, I froze. It was them, our children. They looked different, smaller somehow, their faces pale and their eyes red. They didn't have to say why they were there. I already knew. In their hands were the letters, her letters, wrinkled, tear-stained, read over and over. For a long moment, none of us spoke. My daughter tried, but her voice broke. My son couldn't even meet my eyes. I didn't scold them, didn't comfort them. I just looked at them, quietly, and said, "You're late. But at least you came." They cried, then really cried. The kind of crying that comes from guilt too heavy to hold. And I let them. Because pain, sometimes, is the first step toward remembering what love feels like. We sat together in that house, the same one that used to hold laughter, the same one that had become a tomb of silence. But that day, it felt alive again. Not because everything was fixed, but because truth had finally been spoken aloud. They ignored her voice in life. But they couldn't ignore her silence in death. When they left that evening, I stood by the door for a long time. I wasn't waiting anymore. I wasn't hoping anymore. Something in me had changed. Grief had turned into something quieter, acceptance. As the sun set, the house filled with soft golden light, touching the corners where her laughter used to live. And I realized, maybe she wasn't gone after all. Maybe she was right there, in the light, in the air, in the forgiveness that filled the space between us. Weeks later, they came to the door again. But I was no longer the man who waited. I was the man who had learned to let go. When they finally came back, the house didn't recognize them. It was still the same walls, same furniture, same smell of old books and fading perfume, but it felt different now. The air didn't move the way it used to. It was heavier, quieter, like the house itself was holding its breath. They stood at the doorway for a long time before entering, their faces pale, their hands trembling. They were holding her letters, the same ones she'd written years ago, the same ones they never received until it was too late. They looked around the room like strangers, like people visiting a memory they'd once belonged to. The clock ticked in the corner. Her photograph sat on the table, the one where she was laughing, eyes half closed, sunlight on her face. My daughter reached for it, her fingers shaking. She looked so happy, she whispered. And I said, she was. Even when she shouldn't have been. My son moved through the house in silence. Every step he took stirred something. He paused by her chair, the one by the window, and brushed his hand over the fabric like it might still be warm. Then he sat down slowly, his head bowed. In his other hand was her letter, creased and damp with tears. He read it again and again, as if he was trying to hear her voice through the paper. Outside, the rain began to fall again, soft, steady, the kind of rain she used to love. My daughter opened the door to the garden. The roses were there, though most had wilted, their petals browned at the edges. She knelt beside them, touching the soil, her voice breaking as she said, she planted these herself. I nodded. Every morning. Even when she could barely stand. My daughter lowered her head and whispered, I should have been here. I didn't say anything. Some truths don't need words. They wandered through her things, her diary, her recipe book, her shawl folded neatly on the bed. My son picked up her glasses and placed them back exactly where they were. The small things broke them more than anything else. Because it's never the big things you regret missing, it's the small ones, the tea she wanted to share, the stories she wanted to tell, the moments you thought would always be waiting for you. After a while, my daughter found another letter tucked inside a book. She opened it with trembling hands. Her voice cracked as she read aloud, if you're reading this, it means you've come home. Thank you for coming back. Don't cry for me. Just take care of each other. She stopped, her eyes flooding. The letter fell to her lap. The piano in the background played slower, softer, as if echoing her heartbeat. They sat with me for hours. No one spoke much. The house didn't need words, it was already speaking in its own quiet way. Every corner carried her memory, in the way the light touched the curtains, in the scent of the flowers she'd once arranged, in the space she'd left behind that nothing could fill. As night fell, I lit a candle by her photograph. The flame flickered gently, warm and steady. My children sat beside me, their faces calm but tired. I looked at them, these two souls she loved more than herself, and I saw it at last, the regret, the grief, but also something else. The understanding she had waited for her whole life. My son said softly, Dad, we didn't know how far we'd gone. I nodded, because there was nothing else to say. He reached for my hand, and for the first time in years, I didn't feel alone. My daughter leaned her head on my shoulder, her tears falling onto my sleeve. And in that silence, I realized forgiveness had already arrived. She had left it behind for us, like light after the storm. When morning came, the rain stopped. The garden glistened, every flower heavy with dew. The sun broke through the clouds, painting the world gold. My children walked outside and stood by her roses, their eyes closed, their faces turned toward the light. I stood at the window, watching them, and for the first time, I smiled. Because even though she was gone, she had finally brought them home. They came when the flowers had already dried. And I realized, love doesn't die. People do. But love lingers. In the smell of the rain, in the sound of the wind, in every memory that refuses to fade. If you still have someone waiting for your call tonight, don't make them wait. Because one day, you'll call, and the only thing that will answer is silence. The piano slows to a final, gentle melody. The rain begins again, softer now, almost peaceful. The man's voice fades to a whisper. Love never leaves. It just changes rooms. In the end, it wasn't death that separated us, it was time. But love stayed, waiting quietly, long after everyone else had gone home.